Hey, Jen, I got a social media note tonight from Beverly Foy, who's one of our faithful followers, and she has...
Hi, Beverly.
She has kind of a complaint. She said, Lawrence should tell us in advance if he's taking a week off so I can plan my schedule accordingly. And I was not taking a week off, and I can understand how she thought I was because I've been missing for the last 2 days. Under the weather, with a very quick passing health storm that is completely behind me. But it forced me then to tell Beverly directly on social media, and I'll tell you, but it's just for you and Beverly. She said, I should say in advance when I'm taking the week off. I am taking next week off. I'm going to be on vacation next
Now
week.
People know.
It's really just you and Beverly. I want to know this.
It's just between us, the three of us.
Yeah.
Now, I will tell you, Lawrence, if I had traveled the last 2 days anywhere, people would have stopped me and asked me, where is Lawrence O'Donnell and is he okay? Because I get that question anytime I'm traveling when you're off. So there you go. Maybe I see Beverly, but there are a lot of Beverlys out there.
He was pretty okay. He was almost, but not quite, able to sit in this chair for an hour. And so, but now I can. Now it's completely over, and here we go.
Well, Beverly and I and everyone are happy you're back.
Okay. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thank you. It was another day of stunning defeats for Donald Trump around the world this time. From New York City to Rome, where Donald Trump was crushed once again in his war with the Pope. The only war with a pope ever launched by an American president. Donald Trump's day of humiliation and defeat came once again as a result of traps Donald Trump set for himself. The unifying element of every trap Donald Trump has set for himself is Donald Trump's complete and total ignorance of what he was getting himself into. When Donald Trump decided to become the first president in history with the power to set tariffs, even though the Constitution, the very first law of the land, gave that power to Congress, Donald Trump set a timer on his constitutional humiliation, which was delivered to him earlier this year by the United States Supreme Court, agreeing with the Federal Court of International Trade that Donald Trump's tariffs are unconstitutional and illegal. And tonight, the federal government is steadily refunding $166 billion in tariffs illegally collected by Donald Trump, refunding those tariffs to Americans and American companies that paid those tariffs. Today, that same Federal Court of International Trade, which resides in Lower Manhattan, close to the docks, that were once the center of America's international trade, ruled against another set of Donald Trump's tariffs, finding them illegal and unconstitutional. And this ruling carries, for me, a particular personal joy because of who the judges relied on in writing their opinion. And pardon me for a moment here, but I'm going to digress to talk about those people. And don't worry, I'm going to get to Kashyap Patel. We're going to get to the corruption of Donald Trump as cataloged by the New York Times with one of the reporters who won a Pulitzer Prize for reporting on Trump corruption. Andrew Weissman is going to join us to tell us if, in his years as counsel to the FBI director, it was common for the FBI director to travel with cases of whiskey, as Kashyap Patel does. And we're going to get to the violation of the ceasefire in Donald Trump's war with Iran, a violation that Donald Trump is, from the depths of his perversity, calling a love tap tonight. We're going to get to all of that and more, but first, the people who crushed Donald Trump's tariffs in that federal court ruling today. The judges who wrote that opinion relied on unnamed people. I don't know, but I feel like I know. People before my time, exactly 20 years before my time. The staffs of the Senate Finance Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee, who are the people who really wrote the Trade Act of 1974. It is thankless work, celebrated by no one. The staffs of those committees never got applause. But 52 years after they spent what I know were countless hours, including all-night sessions, writing and negotiating the Trade Act of 1974 as it went from the Senate Finance Committee to the Senate floor to Senate passage, after passage in the House of Representatives and the House Ways and Means Committee, and then a negotiated final version of the bill written by the House Ways and Means Committee staff and the Senate Finance Committee staff together, where they pored over every single word. And because they chose each of those words as carefully as they did, Donald Trump lost in the Court of International Trade today, and the Constitution won 52 years after the dedication of those unknown Senate and House staffers, all experts on international trade, shined through to the judges who studied every word of their work. And on page 32 in the court's ruling today, the Court of International Trade, where all of the judges are experts on international trade, said, quote, "It is clear that Congress was aware of the differences in the words it chose. Congress adopted balance of payments deficits as an issue to be addressed in Section 122A, while it employed the phrase balance of trade surpluses in Section 122C. The balance of payments is different, a totally different thing from the balance of trade." And Donald Trump relentlessly argued to the Court of International Trade that he was justified in imposing his tariffs because of the emergency power granted to him in one clause of that act to deal with what the staffs so carefully described as the balance of payments deficits. The court said that the standard for measuring the balance of payments deficits, which was specified by the staff of the Senate Finance Committee in their report on the legislation at the time, does not justify Donald Trump's absurd imposition of 10% worldwide tariffs. And once again, the Court of International Trade had to quote a line of the Constitution that every president used to understand, quote, "The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises." And once again, the court had to state plainly what everyone writing the Constitution knew and what every economist knows, quote, "The power to tax includes the power to impose tariffs." As the Supreme Court's Chief Justice John Roberts put it, tariffs are taxes. Imagine 52 years ago, you're 34 years old, you're 42 years old, you're on the staff of the International Trade section of the Senate Finance Committee, working away with legislative counsel at 3 o'clock in the morning, trying to express clearly what this small piece of a much larger piece of legislation is really about. And you identify those words, balance of payments, and you make sure those words exists in the staff reports of what this legislation is really about. And 52 years later, those words that you thought might just sleep silently in this legislative record forever become the words that crush Donald Trump's attack on the Constitution that you could never have seen coming. 20 years later, I had one of those jobs in the Senate Finance Committee, and I was in awe of Marcia Miller and Eric Beale and the experts on the international trade staff working on that committee, and Joe Gale and the experts on taxation working on that committee, and Margaret Malone and Faye Drummond working on Social Security policy and welfare policy, and our team of experts on Medicare and Medicaid, all of those things within the jurisdiction of just one committee. And every one of those people worried about every word that went into law, every word. They labored over every word. The senators knew how valuable those people were and thanked them all, but the public never knows. And that's why people like Elon Musk were able to invade the American government and just fire people who devoted their lives to developing the kind of expertise that has been the best part of our government during our lifetimes. You can't thank those people if you don't know they exist. And you cannot appreciate those people if you don't know what they do. And so at the same time that Donald Trump elevated Elon Musk to the position where Elon Musk was literally taking food away from starving people in the middle of a famine, people starving to death at the same time that Elon Musk was taking life-saving HIV medications and other medications away from pregnant mothers in Africa and other poor people around the world in what Bill Gates called, quote, the world's richest man killing the world's poorest children. At the very same time, Donald Trump was making this guy the director of the FBI. The people I met working in government, the people who I worked with closely on the Senate Finance Committee were all more dedicated and more expert in their specialties than I was. I was completely dependent on them as the generalist who was in charge of all of the work that the committee staff was doing, and I was in awe of them and remain in awe of them. And there is not anyone working in the FBI tonight. There is not anyone working in government tonight. There is not anyone working in the White House tonight. There's not anyone in America tonight who is in awe of Donald Trump's FBI director. And of course, Donald Trump's FBI director has dug himself into deeper scandal just in the last 24 hours after suing The Atlantic in what is obviously a frivolous lawsuit after The Atlantic reported on his incompetence and unprofessional behavior. And The Atlantic has now produced the bottle. The Atlantic actually has a bottle of Kash Patel bourbon that The Atlantic is reporting the director of the FBI flies around the world with. Personalized bourbon bottles in the taxpayer-provided FBI jet. And I know it is easy to assume that Donald Trump feels no pain, has never felt any pain. And there is one pain, though, that I suspect he has probably felt. And it is a pain shared by millions of us, millions of people around the world. And that is the pain of watching a loved one trapped in alcoholism. Donald Trump's older brother slipped into alcoholism to the point that he could never again get real control of his life. And Donald Trump watched him die young. The one thing I have in common with Donald Trump is that he has never been drunk. Donald Trump has never had a drink. And so just imagine how much Donald Trump hates, as The Atlantic has reported, seeing Kash Patel publicly reveling in what sure looks like inebriation on the job. And I say on the job because Kash Patel claimed that his trip to Milan, where he watched the Olympic hockey team, was a business trip paid for by you. So that's your FBI director on the job with that bottle in his hand. Donald Trump would love to get rid of that guy. Donald Trump would love for Kash Patel to disappear. But Kash Patel is a trap Donald Trump has set for himself, and Donald Trump knows that the biggest cheers that will erupt at Kash Patel's downfall will come from the people who have never voted for Donald Trump. Those cheers would come from the people who Donald Trump hates more than watching Kash Patel drown himself in booze in a locker room. And so Kash Patel keeps his job as long as Donald Trump remains in the trap he has set for himself with his FBI director. Donald Trump's ceasefire in his war in Iran was broken today, but Donald Trump doesn't want to admit it because he doesn't want his ceasefire to end, because if it does, he is back fully in the trap he set for himself by going to war with Iran. At 5:33 p.m. tonight, CENTCOM released a statement saying, quote, U.S. forces intercepted unprovoked Iranian attacks and responded with self-defense strikes as U.S. Navy-guided missile destroyers transited the Strait of Hormuz to the Gulf of Oman. May 7th, Iranian forces launched multiple missiles, drones, and small boats. No U.S. assets were struck. U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, eliminated inbound threats and targeted Iranian military facilities responsible for attacking U.S. forces, including missile and drone launch sites, command and control locations, and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance nodes. That is the military's official complete description of the incident. No damage done to any American assets. Iran broke the ceasefire by attacking United States Navy vessels, and the Navy responded in a purely defensive way. And the last line of the CENTCOM statement defies everything Donald Trump said he would do if Iran did not immediately, last week or the week before, reach a deal with him, and what Donald Trump would do if Iran ever broke the ceasefire. The last line of the CENTCOM statement says, quote, CENTCOM does not seek escalation, but remains positioned and ready to protect American forces. That is Donald Trump in official CENTCOM language telling the Iranians, please don't do it again. And don't worry, we aren't going to actually attack you now. Donald Trump, in one of those ludicrous, fake phone interviews he does with selected reporters, got on the phone with ABC's Rachel Scott, who reported on Twitter, quote, Donald Trump tells me in a phone call the retaliatory strikes against Iranian targets are just a love tap. It's just a love tap. When I asked if it means the ceasefire is over, no, the ceasefire is going. It's in effect. Just a love tap. Words never used by a president of the United States before. Words never used by anyone in a war before. Words never used by anyone in the military before. I think what that language might be telling us is just how far gone Donald Trump's brain is, how tiny his vocabulary is, and importantly, how afraid he is of Iran taking even more action against the United States, to which Donald Trump would then feel compelled to respond militarily, thereby ruining his ceasefire, which was already ruined. A ceasefire is not a little bit of fire back and forth. A ceasefire is no fire. And Donald Trump cannot achieve and maintain a ceasefire with Iran because Iran apparently is still not afraid of Donald Trump. Iran is still not afraid of firing at U.S. Navy vessels, no matter how many times Donald Trump threatens to commit war crimes against Iran and blow Iran off the face of the earth. Iran keeps saying to Donald Trump, we are not afraid of you. And Donald Trump doesn't know what to do. So Donald Trump says it's just a love tap. And CENTCOM says CENTCOM does not seek escalation. Wasn't CENTCOM supposed to obey Donald Trump's illegal order to blow Iran off the face of the earth for stuff like this? Donald Trump issued a social media post about the violation of the ceasefire in which he revealed that he doesn't know what an ocean is. A president of the United States actually referred to the Strait of Hormuz as an ocean, thereby becoming the first president in history who doesn't know what an ocean is. And no one in the world is surprised that in Donald Trump's continuous display of abject ignorance about elementary school facts, he doesn't know what an ocean is. Donald Trump's social media post about his war will be ignored in this country, where 66% disapprove of Donald Trump's war, and 57% disapprove of Donald Trump's war with the Pope. A new Washington Post poll had this question, quote, Trump posting, I don't want a Pope who thinks it's okay for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Do you have a positive or negative reaction? And 57% said they had a negative reaction to that. That percent would have skyrocketed well into the 80s or more if the Washington Post poll had just pointed out, as the Pope has done, that Donald Trump is lying when he says that the Pope thinks it's okay to have a nuclear weapon. What if the polling question said, what do you think about Donald Trump lying about the Pope saying that? It is entirely possible that most of the people in the Washington Post poll don't know that the Pope has never said that it's okay for Iran or any country to have a nuclear weapon. And so Pope Leo this week had to take it upon himself to, in effect, call Donald Trump a liar, point out Donald Trump's lie, saying, quote, if someone wants to criticize me for proclaiming the gospel, let him do so truthfully. The church for years has spoken against all nuclear weapons. So there's no doubt there. Donald Trump sent sometimes Catholic Marco Rubio to Rome today in a peace-seeking mission with the Pope, something no other American president has had to do. Marco Rubio was born into Catholicism before switching to the Mormon Church, then to evangelical Christian, and in his last religious turn, or I should say most recent religious turn, because we don't know if it's going to be his last religious turn, he is back to Catholicism. If you're wondering if Marco Rubio might have been struggling to choose the most politically convenient religion for a future in politics, it is interesting that he became a Mormon when his family moved to Nevada, where Senator Harry Reid was a member of the Church of Latter-day Saints and one of the powerful Nevada politicians at the time. And then, when evangelicalism shot up to prominence in Republican politics, Marco Rubio joined an evangelical megachurch. And now Marco Rubio is back to Catholicism. The recently chosen religion, J.D. Vance, who spoke of his atheism before finding a religion that could be compatible with a political career if the Pope weren't such a peace-loving preacher of the gospel. Donald Trump's war with the Pope is a trap of his own making. It is a trap that comes from one of Donald Trump's most reliable character flaws, his publicly stated belief that if anyone ever criticizes you or criticizes something you are involved in, like, say, your war with Iran, you must attack that person, no matter who that person is. That is a Trump principle. No person too small for Donald Trump to attack. No person too big for Donald Trump to attack. No person too apolitical, like the Pope, for Donald Trump to attack. And so now Donald Trump is trapped in himself, with his own voters now able to see finally sparks of who he really is, how deeply, deeply perverse he really is. The Washington Post poll shows that 87% of Americans have a negative view of this, depicting what the Washington Post poll called, quote, an image appearing to depict himself as Jesus. 87% have a negative view of that. But the most important number in that poll is that 80% of the people who voted for Donald Trump in 2024 have a negative view of Donald Trump depicting himself as Jesus Christ. 80% of Donald Trump's most recent voters see Donald Trump in that image the same way that we do, the same way any sane, decent person would see Donald Trump in that sick image. No opponent of Donald Trump has been able to get Trump voters to see Donald Trump negatively. But the person who broke through, the person who got 80% of Trump voters to have a negative reaction to Donald Trump, was Donald Trump himself. Because Trump traps himself. Senator Adam Schiff will join us after this break.